welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Indavina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Spencer Hoad, and if you're not familiar with Spencer, Spencer is an engineer, producer, and mixer based out of Los Angeles. He's worked on lots of different genres of music, everything from pop, rock, alternative, metal. He's worked with artists such as Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, D.R.U.G.S, Blink-182, Avril Lavigne, Sia, Fifth Harmony, and a whole bunch more as well. And in today's conversation, we dive deep into his journey of learning to become a stronger engineer. And he talks about the idea of, when he was first getting started, learning on his own, to then getting internships and working in studios, working his way up, and then even taking a step back and kind of like downgrading his position, if you want to call it that, so that he could progress his skills even further and learn from other engineers. And he got the opportunity to work under people like John Feldman, who's a major influence on me as an engineer and producer. So we definitely dive into, his time working with John and some of the records that he worked on with him, with bands like D.R.U.G.S or Red Jumpsuit Apparatus. And we get into some of the process of, the things that he learned watching John work and how he produces bands. And then we get into some more technical stuff. We get into the idea of leaning into saturation during tracking. And it's interesting because, when it comes to saturation, it's one of those things where most people are taught you should never clip your signals. You should always avoid the red. But as you'll hear in this interview, a big part of that John Feldman drum sound that a lot of people love has to do with clipping. And so you have to understand when it's a reasonable time to do it, how far to go with it, and how it can ultimately make your mixing process a lot easier and really help shape sounds and create a lot of cohesiveness in a project too. So yeah, we definitely dive into that. And we also go even further on that topic of cohesion and how to create cohesiveness in a mix when you're working with genre bending verses and choruses and just songs in general that have a wide range of sonics to them. If you're working with a band like a Limp Bizkit or something like that, where you're combining different genres, how do you make all of those elements come together in a way that just makes sense? Because if you just slap a whole bunch of things on top without any clear idea of what you're going to do with it, it can definitely fall apart really quickly. So yeah, we get into Spencer's approach about genre bending and mixing with that kind of stuff, how to create that cohesiveness, and ultimately just make records that feel the way that they should and that don't get too wrapped up in technicalities, and instead just focus on creating the best song, creating the best vibe. That's what this is all about, right? So yeah, I think this is a really fun episode. Spencer's a lot of fun, just a great hang, and definitely has some great insights too. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Spencer Hoad, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going today, dude?
Absolutely, man. I'm psyched to be here. So psyched that you asked me to be on. It's a beautiful day in Los Angeles. It's about 8:15. I'm psyched we got started a little bit later today because I got one of these, alerts on my phone that the whole neighborhood wakes up to, and it's like bloop. So, it's great to start a little late so that we don't have to capture that moment for everyone.
Nice. I like how you said like 8 o'clock is late, because like for so many other people, it's like so early. I'm totally not a morning person, but I have a daughter now, and I've had to learn to just like get used to getting up at like 6 a.m. and get used to it,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Early is the name of the game sometimes, and I feel like I kind of enjoy waking up early because I can get a lot of stuff out of the way and then be creative in like the later part of the day. So I think waking up early is awesome. It's like, yeah, there's a lot to be done.
For sure. So for people who might not be familiar with you and who you are, what you do, and your background and how you got into all this stuff, can you give us that story?
Yeah, so I produce, I mix, I write songs. I have been mastering stuff lately, which has been interesting because I haven't really pursued that path. It just has, come across my lap. I love being in the studio, man. I'm a studio rat for life. I can't get away from it. I think the love of the game is 100% the reason why I'm doing it. And yeah, I don't know. I love making crazy shit.
So what first got you into it?
So I was playing with some homies in high school in bands and stuff, and we sort of just needed a way to like demo songs. And so I had a buddy whose mom was kind enough to help him get, like a M audio kind of interface, like something that was just, probably not great compared to what we were able to have today. And we started making songs through that, and just, barely knew anything about recording or Pro Tools or anything. I think it came with like Pro Tools, maybe LE or something. and we set up like his computer in like a closet and just had a drum kit in the room, and we like took his mattress and flipped it up against the door, so if there was like a fire, we'd probably be screwed, but you could work your way out eventually. And just kind of started doing it out of like necessity for hearing what your ideas are, and hearing like the parts you're supposed to know, and like just sort of figuring out how can we like play this stuff back when we're not at a band rehearsal, and it wasn't anything serious. Like we were probably 16 years old. I started playing in bands with my buddies when I was like in about 6th grade, I think was my first band. And it was just, it was just out of proximity too. It's funny how this stuff ends up, because it's like, I played guitar and I met a dude at a new school that I was attending who played drums. And so it was like, all right, well, you're going to be the drummer and I'll be the guitar player, and we'll just go from there, man. And we found some guy who played trumpet, and like, found a guy who wanted to sing, and eventually we're like, oh, okay, we're going, And so we weren't really recording stuff. Yeah, really, right? No, we did some covers, and like we did some like pool house gigs at the swimming pool and stuff. But yeah, just kind of out of necessity. And I think that sort of continues to this day, where it's like the engineering sort of helps get the product done, and it helps you get to where you want to be with like what you hear in your head. And I think just trying to achieve the sound that you hear in your head can be a total adventure, right? And knowing how to like use tools to get there, and knowing that like, oh, this one piece of gear does this thing really well, or this, we need to use this kind of mic to get this kind of a sound. Like knowing that kind of stuff is for me, it's like all about getting to the produced sound. And so I think I started getting into all of this stuff just out of like the necessity to hear what I wanted to hear back.
Gotcha. So was it all self-taught, or did you ever like have any formal training or go to school or anything?
My buddy who I was making the project with when we were working in the closet, me and him got out of Kansas City, where I grew up, and moved to LA, and he did like a recording program kind of thing. And I ended up going to school for like guitar craft. So I learned how to like build a guitar from scratch, and like, do setups, and like tweak a Floyd Rose and stuff, like all this crazy stuff, woodworking kind of. And then I ended up kind of going down a similar path as him, and I took some of the recording program. And honestly, man, like both of us were not floored by the thing, right? Like we were kind of like scratching our heads at it, like, is this for real? Like what we're here for? Like this, So I don't know. I wouldn't say we like blew it off, right? But it was kind of like, I would say a school is a great place to go if you're sort of like new to every concept. Like if you don't know how to compress something, or you don't know what like a threshold is, then I would say like that's a great place to go. We found it more helpful to go and intern at a studio. So we both found internships, got hired like shortly after, and sort of just like that sort of continued, I guess, to this day. I mean, it's an old school system, the studio system, where you're sort of like banging on the door, like begging for work. And then you're, cleaning stuff, and you get moved up to like runner and paid runner. And, then you're kind of like patching stuff together. Eventually you're like running sessions. And so the studio that I had started out at kind of had promoted me to being like, I guess like I had a salary, or like a monthly stipend kind of thing. So I could sort of take care of like the generic stuff. And then if sessions came in, I could get paid to assist those. And, just kind of went from there, man. Was able to like shadow a lot of really cool producers coming through. I got to assist for like Joe Ciccarelli, and Greg Kirsten was in there for a good chunk of time. So being able to like watch these guys over the shoulder, there wasn't a lot of YouTube, tutorial mixed with the masters kind of stuff back then. And so it was really impressive to just be able to like watch guys who had made, I mean, Greg Kirsten is one of my all-time like top impressed dudes, man. Like he's so unbelievably talented. And like when you look at his credits, you're just shocked at all the stuff you didn't know that he worked on. Like he has keyboard credits on like Californication, by Chili Peppers, like unbelievable, right? And he produced the Sia record over there, the We Are Born record. And just being able to see like tricks and stuff that people are doing without even really thinking too much about what they're doing. And, you know, he's just such a creative flow guy. And you're just like, whoa, man, you just did what? Like, I think the best way to learn from people like that is just by being quiet. And I didn't like ask a lot of questions at the time. I just kind of like observed and tried to understand like why or what, you know, understand the effects of what I'm seeing done with like knob twist combinations or mic placement, or even just how people have a bedside manner in the studio. Like that's really important. And I think one of the things that I was really bad at first in the studio was like just being being nice and being like a dope hang and stuff. You know, when you're with your friends and you're making records, especially in like high school, there's definitely times where I was a huge dick to people that I loved and cared about at the time, because I'm like, you fucking suck at, you know, singing or whatever. And like, it took me some time to like get in the mood to support people in the right way. You know what I mean? And seeing some of those guys, the way they kind of addressed issues in the studio or the way they talked to the artists and stuff, that stuff is really, really critical. Because I think knowing your craft and everything is important. Knowing the technical things is important, but being a dope hang is the key thing, man. Like if we can't hang out in the studio for 12 hours a day for a month, like it's going to be a bad time, you know, and the record's probably going to not sound great. The teams that have the best time together, I think the most fun, end up making some really cool stuff.
Yeah, man. I think it's interesting because I definitely can understand what you're talking about. Like when you're hanging out with your buddies, like, you know, it's like you just like love to make fun of each other. You have a good time. Like that's like just like friendly dynamics, right? But you often don't realize that like when it comes down to like people actually trying to like, you know, pour their emotions out and when they're singing and stuff like that, like, yeah, like you're still a good hang and like having fun and whatever, but it's like that kind of shit, like depending on what you say, can definitely seep into people's heads and throw them off their game or get them thinking like they can't be as open or, you know, give the full emotional performance that they need to make their song sound great, right? So I think it's awesome that you mentioned that, because it's yeah, like you obviously, when you're working with clients, you want to get them comfortable and you want to feel like you're friends and like have that level of trust and honesty and all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, you still have to be very careful of your words and how they interpret it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm definitely guilty of it at times. You know, I've gotten way better at dealing with people, and some of it has to do with like, you know, my upbringing and stuff and all that. But, you know, without getting too deep into all that, it's like, it's very important to feel comfortable in the studio. And a buddy of mine recently kind of was explaining it to a new guy that we were working with together. And he said, look, when you come in here, it's okay to fall. It's okay to try stuff and fail, and nobody's going to make fun of you. Nobody's going to like think you suck at this instrument, you know? And like, you know, when you're like young enough and you don't have like, your brain's not like fully developed or anything, and you're not thinking very well. And, you know, we were just in high school, but yeah, it would be like, we would just badger each other, bro. And to the point where somebody would say one more thing, and then it was like, oh, now the mood is bad and we want to all like kill each other. So, I mean, it happens, but I think it's important to like maintain positivity and just have like a positive, you know, mindset about why you're here and what you're doing. And, you know, we're lucky enough, like I was saying earlier, we're lucky enough to be able to like work in this environment where we're kind of making art, and sometimes we're getting paid for it. And that's really fortunate in 2025 to be able to say. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's cool to hear like you have that opportunity to learn from a bunch of different people like that. And actually, one person that I was interested in asking about that you worked with is John Feldman. And I'm a huge John Feldman fan. I love a lot of his productions. So I'm curious to know, like, how did that opportunity come about? And, you know, what were some of those lessons you learned from working with him?
Yeah, so I had a friend, Brandon Paddock, working there. Brandon's also from Kansas City and is a great dude. Awesome producer, engineer. Like, he's had the ear for the thing since he was, you know, young, man. great guy to know, and it's wild that he is like from, you know, the same area code. So I was fortunate enough to hit him up and say, you know, hey man, like, can I come over and intern or something? Like, I've been a Feldman fan for, you know, a long time. Like, the Used were like a huge band when I was growing up, and it was like, this is a new thing coming, you know? I mean, John has everything to do with like the Used and Story of the Year and stuff, and like that's a whole scene. Like, I don't have to, you know, because you know, you're a fan. Yeah. But it's like, man, just the, you know. Anyway, yeah, Brandon's like, oh, you want to work? Come on through. Like, we got plenty to do. So I go over, and it's like, you know, the first day, John's doing pre-production and writing with like what became the band D.R.U.G.S, Destroy, Rebuild Until God Shows. So it's like a super group, right? It's like Craig Owens, Matt Good, Nick Martin, Aaron Stern, and Adam from Story of the Year ended up playing bass. And, you know, just the craziest lineup. And all those guys are so talented and so like unbelievably gifted at their craft. Like, watching Nick and Matt work on guitar stuff together was just unreal. Like, the parts they came up with, like, I still listen to that record from time to time just to be like, this is such an underrated thing for what it was, you know? But anyway, yeah, I go over, and it's like you know, they didn't even, I think, have the whole lineup figured out at the time. But yeah, man, I went over there and just was immediately like, you know, cruising down the hill to like pick up food for those guys. And like, I think I still could probably get about half of the coffee orders right. And it was kind of a humbling experience for me going over there, because like, I had already done a good chunk of time at a commercial studio that had a Neve 8068. Like, I had worked with some, like I was saying, with, you know, Greg and Joe Ciccarelli. Like, I had worked with some awesome dudes to work with, but I wasn't really where I felt like I could be, right? So going over there was like, hey, look, I really don't know what to do to get the stuff to sound this way. Like, this stuff, it blows my mind, right? So I need to get closer to that. And so just being able to like see that process up close and have to take a little bit of an ego hit for it was awesome, because like, I wasn't good at editing as tightly as those guys needed things to be edited, and I wasn't as good at tuning things. Like, a lot of the stuff we did at the commercial studio that I was at was like, bands would come in, track a bunch of stuff, and maybe leave. Like, I did get to work on a Steel Train record, which is Jack Antonoff's band before he started making Fun with Nate. But they did the first Fun record there like a month before I started there, man. So I was bummed to miss that, because Fun is an amazing project. But, you know, to go from like you're pushing faders on a Neve and tracking, and it's awesome, to like getting coffee again for the sake of like learning and improving your craft and everything was like I said, humbling. So yeah, getting over there was awesome, man. John's an amazingly prolific songwriter. I think he's way ahead of his time as far as going digital. You know, I think his mixes have been mostly in the box for probably, you know, as long as he could get away with, or I should say like as early as he could get away with. I think the first Used stuff was done with like a Control 24 and maybe like an extra preamp or something. But he's a great inspirational force in the sense that he will use what he has and just make the art. And he's got a process, it works for him. And there's something going on over at that fool's house, man, that is inspiring. And like, that's rare to see. And I think a lot of it has to do with how he approaches like maybe some of the like spirituality angles of life, and knowing that there's like stuff that we have to go out and like find, and there's like a driving force behind everything, you know. But that fool puts out records, man. Wow. What a dude. And he's such a like, he's been a really helpful guy for me in like my personal life as well as in the studio. But yeah, to be able to get over there and work on stuff and see, you know, how the sausage is made, for lack of a better term, is unbeatable experience.
For sure, man. I bet. Well, one record that you worked on with him that I'm curious to dig into, I love the sound of that record, is the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, Am I the Enemy record. And to me, that album, like, one of the things that really stands out on that album is the sound of the drums. And I think that's actually kind of like a signature sound of Feldman anyway. You know, his drums always sound amazing. But I was wondering if you could share any insight as to, like, you know, the recording process of getting those drums and getting them to sound the way they do.
Yeah, so to me, he sort of had 3 drum sounds, or maybe there's like segments of his career where I think of them in like 3 different sounds. So the first era, I think, would be like the Used early records, Story of the Year stuff, you know, that kind of thing. One song that I think was the first song that was done at his newer house was Dear Child by Anthony Green, which is like an amazing song, dude. I had no idea. And he was randomly like, yeah, I think the first song we did here was like that song with Anthony. And I was just like, what? That's like one of my favorite songs to listen to in high school, right? But not to do with like what we're talking about, but just an amazing career trajectory, right? So the first stuff I think was done off of that Control 24, and I know that he was doing a lot of those records at, like, I think it was like in a back room kind of studio in Marina Del Rey. And then when he moved to Sherman Oaks, it was like a bigger house. They tore out, you know, the dining room, and he had this studio was one of the coolest things, man, for a home studio, because it was like the main control room and vocal booth was like off the kitchen. So you could get in and like work in the morning and have your coffee and like all that. That's where all the gear is. And then the basement went, you know, half of the basement is like a regular ceiling, probably 10 foot high. And then the other half of the studio is like full, you know, they removed the dining room. So above where the drums are, like maybe the cymbals, I guess, is probably where we had the kit like spaced. I say we, like I had something to do with it, right? But, you know, you have this super high ceiling. So where the control room, the main control room looks out to is like across to just the second story wall that's up there. And the drums are actually down below in the basement. But under the main control room, there's a secondary control room with like a mirrored computer monitor and mouse and keyboard setup. So you have this mini set of speakers down there just to like get eye contact and do sight lines and stuff. And once all the gear's set up, you just cruise down there and make the performance happen. So I think that room is really cool, or it was, you know, he's got sightlines now and stuff, but like having the sightlines back then was super critical, because like he'll tell everybody like, oh, I'm a drummer at heart, you know, I tell the drummers exactly, you know, what I'm hearing and stuff, and you know, that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, that record is like a lot of I'm trying to think. I mean, it's, you know, some of it's your basic stuff like dynamics on the snare and stuff, you know, and then I think a big part of that era is like, you know, ribbon mics on the room, and there's a lot of like Neve style preamps that are, you know, pretty cranked up hot and then attenuated on the output. And it's, you know, some tape saturation stuff and that kind of thing. The drummer was a lot of fun to work with. He had some great stories about the record that they did with David Bendith, who's also just a phenomenal producer. I haven't met him, but I'm a huge fan of what he does, and just I think he has an unbelievable sound. And, you know, he was talking a little bit about, just for a little piece of nugget of an information, you know, he was saying that for that Face Down song that David made Ronnie cut the lead vocal 9 different times. So just imagine being on, and I'm not talking like 9 takes. I'm talking like we cut the vocal, chopped it up, tuned it, mixed it. Here's how it is. Imagine being on like number 6. You're just like, oh, this sucks so bad, man. But like, you know, that song still bangs, you know. But
it's
anyway,
like really trusting the process and knowing where it could go, and
I
really
know.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of somebody who's like not willing to settle. And I've heard stories from buddies who have worked for David who are like, yeah, you know, he makes the band practice before, and like, you know, you're not going to show up and just like get by with whatever. He's not going to settle for mediocrity. To get back to what you're talking about though, with the the red jumpsuit thing. That record was a ton of fun to work with. Those guys are super nice. I still stay in touch with the guitar player at the time, Matt Carter. He's got a different life now. He's not in the band, but him and Joey became good homies of mine. The drums on that, I think we might have used John's house kit, which I don't remember what it was, to be honest. But at the time, he was getting some kits from, I think, Drum Fetish, which is like a drum cartage company here in LA. They rent stuff. But a lot of it's just, tuning the drums, mic placement, and some editing. That editing's critical in all this stuff. And it was a fun record, man. That record has some awesome guitar tones too. I think you're right. It does have great drum sounds.
Well, you mentioned like the Neves and driving the preamps on that. And that's actually something I've had a couple of John's assistants come on the podcast, and they've all commented on that exact same thing, that that is a big part of the drum sound. And I'm curious to know, you said that when you started working with him, it was kind of this humbling experience of coming in at it from the perspective of I just want to learn the thoughts behind what goes into this and how to go, how to get the sound that you want. And when it comes to driving preamps like that, especially with drums, what would you say were some of the biggest lessons there as far as knowing how far to go, but without painting yourself in a corner of maybe oversaturating or, killing transients by driving it too hard, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. So this can get so deep so fast, man. It's awesome.
Let's go.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to come from a studio that had an 8068 Neve console, which is basically, I think it was short loaded. So it was 24 channels of Neve 31 102 mic preamps, which are to this day, sick AF, right? And I think a preamp by itself probably shops for around 12 grand on Reverb or something, a ridiculous price. I would never pay it, but it's basically, a better sounding, I'll get killed for saying that. It's a better sounding 1084, right? For the modern equivalent. And so coming from that and working with all these old school guys who went to tape, don't really edit, the first record I was seeing happen at that studio, the first, day I walked in, was Built to Spill. So that's a band that is not going to use Pro Tools for anything unless they have to. And I think what they ended up doing was tracking a bunch of stuff to 2-inch 24 track and then dumping that into Pro Tools, but only to use it as a tape machine. They weren't going to chop stuff and that kind of thing, right? And I think they mixed it down to 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. So knowing some of those things was super helpful because you ask, well, if the fader's at unity, why don't you push that up to plus, 10 or whatever? I forget how a Neve's laid out, but it's plus 10 or 12. Why don't you just push that up if you want more? It's no, we're not going for more of the level. We're going for more of trying to overdrive the transistors in the circuit, right? So if you go to where it is pretty hot hitting the converter, that's probably a little bit hotter, maybe hotter than you would hit to tape, right? So if you crank the pre up, you're getting this saturation, this nonlinear thing happening from the transistor and the circuitry within the front end of the preamp. And the fader is the same thing on the desk as, maybe an output fader. And that's with the caveat. Knob. So yeah, it's like an output knob. It's just a gain knob, or I guess it's a level knob, right? But on a console, there's a bunch of other stuff in the way of that fader. So on a console, it's there's the preamp module with the EQ, and then there's a bunch of other stuff in the way. And so by the time you get to the output of the console, there's a few extra transformers in there that aren't found in your typical racked up Brent Avril type gear, 1073s and stuff. But you can still get a lot of hair from that preamp. So once you start going, a click or two past where you're wanting to be, and if you go way past, you'll hear how bad it can get. But there's a sweet spot for sure where you're sort of overdriving the thing. And I'm certainly not the first, and neither is John, not the first people to do this, but it has an effect on drums where, you're trying to get saturation and compression and even to an extent distortion to happen from like an organic thing that's not a plug-in source. And so in certain times it's really beneficial to like destroy gear, right? And there, you know, like a 1176 that's just like teched out and all buttons in is an awesome way to get extra distortion. And there's a nuke setting on a distressor, you know, there's so many cool ways to like get it. And overdriving a Neve on drums is like a classic one. That's probably been going for, you know, since they came out. But yeah, that's a huge part of getting a fat drum signal. And it does compress a little. The way the EQ interacts with the preamp and all that is a whole thing. So once you're, you know, cranking 60 hertz a lot, and I'm talking like almost all the way to the moon, you know, I don't know how much gain you get on the low band there. Like I don't think mine are labeled, but you know, let's say it goes to plus 18. If you're hitting like plus 15 on the low end, it's going to do something. And it ends up sort of doing this cool, like compression saturation thing, even though you don't have a compressor in. So that's a huge, you know, top secret information, right? It's awesome. So once you hit, you know, tape or a tape plugin with that, it has a very different effect than if you just had, you know, we could say like a clean preamp, or we could say like the same preamp, but not tweaked and then attenuated, you know, it would be a very different thing. And there's actually some great plugins that will do a very similar thing. And I'm not endorsed or anything, right? But hit me up, Plugin Alliance. Plugin Alliance has the Lindell, I think it's the Lindell 80 channel. And I've found this plugin to be super helpful with getting this type of thing happening. There's basically like on the left-hand side, there's a red gain knob. Looks just like a Neve channel because I think it's supposed to be, right? But there's like a unity button on this thing. And so if you start cranking the red knob up, the gain knob, you'll end up getting the signal to even become quieter after a while. The unity thing basically just, you know, it's a level balanced thing. So like as you're turning up the input, it's trimming the level down to help your speakers out, right? But once you start using that, it's really helpful on stuff, you know? So if I get stuff that's like recorded through who knows what preamp, like if somebody's just used stock Apollo preamp to send me drums to mix, like I'm putting that plugin on to get that same kind of thing happening. And yeah, that's the meat and potatoes of that drum sound, where that starts.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I love that you mentioned like that compression idea, because I think that is a good way of describing the sound of that driven preamp sound. And again, going back to that Red Jumpsuit record, like to me, when I listen to the kick drums on that record in particular, like you can hear the saturation, but like it's so tasteful and it adds this sustain, you know, like most kick drums sound like super quick and they're in and out, whereas like that has like length to it. And you could tell that that's just a product of the saturation and the compression of that preamp. And it's done in a way that, yeah, it's like, it's not like it's sounding like super driven, like broken speaker kind of saturation, that kind of thing, but it's got something to it that's just giving this extra length and body. And it's definitely something that I think, you know, a lot of people when they're first learning about preamps and gain staging and stuff like that, it's like that first lesson you learn is like, don't distort, don't go in the red. But it's like sometimes that's actually a good thing if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? And so understanding the difference between the drive knob and your fader and, you know, feeding your Pro Tool system using the combination of the two, like that's it's an important thing to know, because you can get very creative with sounds and ultimately do a lot of shaping on the way in just because of your
absolutely
preamps.
Man. Yeah, it's a super beautiful sound to me. I mean, I have, you know, all kinds of flavors of preamps, and you know, Neve are definitely some of the best ones for that kind of thing. I think too, like knowing how to use the EQ in conjunction with driving that front end is really important for getting that. And some of that could probably be attributed to the outside kick mic and just how much boost you can give that thing. So, you know, once you're using the EQ and the preamp to really compress, you know, you're using stuff for the wrong thing, but it's working in a really nice way. So just knowing that you can like crank 60 hertz on the outside mic to almost no end, and the preamp will take it in a way that like helps your record in the long run, that kind of stuff's awesome, and knowing how twisted some of the front end stuff can look but still sound really good has sort of translated to me in the long run to print plugins as you go. If you have a plugin chain that's like 9 deep and the only one you're tweaking is the last one in the chain, like I'm committing to plugin 8 at that point. And I think that kind of helps me like finish things. So, obviously we live in a world where there's less and less ability to have like a fully running analog room at all times. And you're just like, oh, let's just call up that other thing on the massive console that we have, that day is like a luxury at this point. And, I could be pulling up like 4 or 5 sessions a day to tweak on, and they've all got to pop up pretty quickly. So I think knowing how the gear works in the traditional sense has really helped me like find either plug-in chains that work in a similar way, or it's helped me to, just commit things early and not feel bad. Like, I mean, if it sounds dope to you, man, like, let's go, we gotta make another song, right? Like when we started this podcast, we were first talking about like, why'd you get into this? And it's like, not so that I can fiddle with gear all day. It's to get the art to translate. So I think, knowing that you can print that stuff down is just awesome.
For sure. Well, you brought up another interesting point, which is that idea of like multi-miking drums and, having like a kick inside and kick out. Obviously, that's a very common thing. But tying it back to that whole saturation conversation, when it comes to determining like, okay, we're going to add some saturation to the kick drum, how do you then decide, well, I'm going to distort the outside mic versus the inside mic or that kind of thing? Like what's the thought process behind that for you?
I think it becomes distort everything because, here's the thing. You can get a great sound with a bunch of mics. It introduces a lot of issues potentially with phase and it's just more stuff to worry about. One of my favorite producers, Mac DeMarco, has gotten a ton of incredible drum sounds with a single microphone. And so the thing to remember, which I think he's doing, is remember that the drums as a whole are an instrument. And so like, yeah, there may be like 17 mics on a kit at times, but a drum kit is the drummer in the band is a guy. There's not a snare player and a kick player and stuff. And they do need to sort of have a glued and fixed space to be in to an extent. And I think having everything coated with a little bit of that type of saturation ends up making the kit feel more like a whole piece that's glued together. And then on top of that, you can compress the whole kit. You can crunch up the whole kit. You can send, one of my favorite things to do for a little bit of extra, maybe like splat, is bust the dry shell mics to some compressor and just nuke it. Make it super slammed out, and you could have like a distortion bus that has some of the high end like rolled off, so it's not super brash, but just making it sound like a kit is the thing to focus on. And so I think I think just trying to isolate it to like, oh, this one mic is going to be the mic we distort. I feel like it's more everything, and then you can add extra sauce later, because you don't want to necessarily paint yourself into a corner with something that's too blown out to where you're like trying to reach for dynamics later on. But like an interesting thing that could happen is like, I was tracking at a studio on a 4000E console that the E's are the ones that have the transformer in the preamp section. So it's a little bit different than like a G or something, but fun console to track drums on. And like the snare channel had, I don't remember if it was the top snare or bottom snare. It doesn't really matter for what ended up happening, but the preamp was broken. And something in the preamp circuit was like totally distorted, man. But when you had it in with the rest of the kit, it sounded awesome. And we were just like, why does this snare sound like so like fucked out and like total THD? Like it sounds incredible, but you go to solo it and it's just like, oh, this sounds like a garbage mic. Like this sounds broken. It sounds wrong. So we like end up, like splitting the mic and using that preamp and a clean preamp so that we can have the distorted sound as an effect, But like I said, you don't want to paint yourself too deep in the corner. So I think some level of the saturation is good, and then you can stack plugins or use hardware or something to get some more. But I think the overall thing to remember is that it's an instrument. The drums are an instrument, and so to get them to sound cohesive is like mission number one. And so overall, I think adding that saturation to everything helps that a lot.
For sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. You have to have it as like one unit. And then, yeah, I mean, you can, obviously these days people are adding samples and stuff like that after the fact too. So if you do go too far, you always can fall back on that kind of stuff. And many do, right? But I think like, yeah, getting the overall vibe of a kit is always really important. And then making sure, obviously, you have the performance, you have the dynamics, all the stuff that's important to the song, you're capturing it the way it needs to be. And then you can tweak from there, right?
Yeah, and a lot of automation will help with the little nuances and stuff. If there's a really detailed hi-hat part, maybe you turn the hi-hat mic up a little bit, Or I know, back to analog days, like guys will ride the overheads to hit the crash, and then maybe you could bring it back a little bit, or pump up the rooms on a drum fill or something. That stuff really makes it feel like you're able to focus on the parts of the kit that you're supposed to focus on at the right time. And then it lets things get out of the way for the song. You know what I mean? Because drummers have a tendency, you have a kit behind you. So I'm assuming you play the drums. Drummers have a tendency to overplay. Am I wrong?
Absolutely.
So sometimes the thing's got to get out of the way,
No, for sure. No. And that's, like maybe it comes back down to what we were talking about at the beginning of like coaching people through their performances and, learning to simplify and focus on what's actually important. But you're absolutely right. Yeah. Well, speaking of cohesiveness, like another record that you worked on that I love the sound of as well is the Used Vulnerable album. And I know you mentioned them earlier and as an inspiration. So pretty cool that you got to work on a project with them. But one of the things that I love about that band is just like, the way that their arrangements are set up, and it's almost theatrical in the sense where you get like a rock chorus that gets followed by like an orchestral verse or like an industrial sounding verse and that kind of thing. And I'd imagine that from an engineering perspective, that could be pretty challenging to get that cohesiveness between all of those different sections. And so I'm wondering if you can comment on that a little bit about, when you're working on such diverse sounds, like how do you find that balance where things can flow together and sound as one unit?
I think I'll try to answer this in a broad sense. I think overall, with the nice Pro Tools rigs and stuff that we have, and digital audio in general, something that people forget is that the song, in a way, is start to finish. And so something that helps me finish mixes quicker and get stuff to sound more cohesive is listening from start to finish and not just looping a section and being like, okay, I've heard this for 4 hours straight. Why is it that when I play it from the intro, this part still sucks? And it's like the whole reason that this massive chorus sounds so massive is because we had to get there somehow. So you've got to sort of climb the mountain to get there, and then you've got to come down the other side too and survive. If it just only gets louder and louder and louder, I don't, not to say that couldn't work for some type of a song where it just keeps getting bigger, but I think to get everything balanced and stuff, you've sort of got to have the overall perspective for the piece of art that it is, So to get it to sound really big in a way, there's got to be some quiet sections. Like you can't have loud without quiet. You can't have clean without distorted, right? So I don't know. I think two songs that demonstrate that perfectly are "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
That was the first song that came to my mind as soon as you said that.
It's like we got this sound, we got that sound, and That's awesome. That juxtaposition is perfect for what that needs to be. And a song that I think is very similar in doing that is Nookie, Limp Bizkit, right? It's like, here's the quiet part, here's the loud part. And so you can't have one of those things without the other thing. And I think on records like D.R.U.G.S has been known to make, they're very good at pulling it back and tweaking the energy level. And, you know, not to say that the records aren't loud or anything, but it's like if a massive section comes in, the record needs to go back down for the sake of getting to that big section again. And I think that's it sounds complicated when you hear it in the record, you know, or something, but it's like in practice, it's a very basic arrangement kind of thing, which is like, okay, well, we have those loud distorted guitars all through the hook, and we have a stacked octave, and we have like this synth thing that's like accentuating certain things and doing this, you know, up and down thing or something like that. And maybe in the verse, we'll like take all of that down or out, and we'll just use like a clean, you know, chorus delayed kind of guitar thing to sort of act like a pad and feel like we're in some water. And we'll tuck like a Juno in there, like filtered way down, just so you don't even hear it, but you feel it, that kind of thing. And that makes room for other elements to come and go as they need to, you know? And I think some of that stuff is like really awesome to have seen John work on, you know? He's always tweaking the arrangement, it seems like, until it's time to like upload. Which is awesome. I think we're in an age where you can do that, and I think just committing that hard to like the song being good and knowing that the song needs to everything about it, the mix, the production, every element that's in it, the arrangement, the lyrics, even like all of that stuff needs to serve the song. And so to be able to like surrender to that process of like, you know what, I know it's mixed, but this lyric rubs me the wrong way, like that kind of thing, or this arrangement is screwy. And he's, you know, not the only mixer to do that. I think a lot of mixers focus more on balancing and, you know, getting it finished and stuff. But there's definitely mixers who are on the more creative side or have a better ear maybe for the arrangement in some aspects, where it's like they'll send like a different arrangement back and that gets used. And that's like special when that happens, because I think they're thinking of it from a way of like, you know, how can I make this song better? It's not some ego thing where they're like, oh, now I need a production credit or something, you know, but he definitely knows what he wants. John definitely knows what he wants to hear and is down to finesse it until the very end to get it there. And so I think all the arrangement skill that he has is just like, it's hard to match.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, when I asked that question, I was thinking of like, you know, when you have these very different sounding kind of genres within a song, a lot of people would just assume that like it's not going to blend well together. But I like how you put it of like it's focusing more on not so much the genre, that doesn't really matter because it's all coming together as a song, but it's more about the contrast of sections. Because yeah, if everything is loud, then nothing is loud, and that chorus will never actually sound loud and stand out on its own. So it does make sense to focus really on like creating more of those dynamic shifts. And however you do that, whatever the sonics are, it doesn't matter. It's just creating these shifts, and that alone can make the song feel more cohesive just because of, you know, you're creating growth and taking things in and out of the song. So that does make sense to me.
I mean, I think with what you're saying with like genre blending or you know, whatever it is these days, like I get told all the time by homies that work at you know, labels and stuff, like we're in like a genre-less time, right? Like you can have a project like Bill Murray, which is, you know, Johnny Frank from Attack Attack. You can have a project like that, which blends like almost like trap music with metal and, you know, Charlie XCX and stuff like that. That's just, you know, not stuff that you would typically consider like, oh, this is like a rock project or something. It's like, no, you kind of have to hear some of this stuff to get it. Like, that's awesome. And you learn to sort of like blend the elements in maybe non-traditional ways. Like, I think obviously hip hop has like a ton of low end, and there's a ton of 808s and like tuned bass notes, right? And stuff like that. So when you listen to that, or some kind of maybe electronic music has a ton of low end, there's a really powerful kick drum. When you listen to some of that stuff against some maybe more traditional like rock stuff, some of the rock stuff sounds kind of thin. You know, it doesn't have this girthiness to it that like fills up the, you know, the EDC Las Vegas kind of feel. Like, so getting those two things to balance well becomes sort of an adventure to go on. That's a lot of fun because, you know, if you want to have this trap feel or, you know, some tuned 808 thing happening at the same time that there's like a guitar part happening, you may treat that guitar different than normal, or you may treat the 808 in a way that like carves out room for the guitar or something. But, you know, you sort of have to abandon the traditional values of an engineer and figure out a way to make it happen. You know, I think that stuff is some of the fun that's left to be had in engineering, you know, because John always says this, you know, it's like, just when he's talking about like the extra elements, he's like, look, nobody wants to hear like guitar, bass, and drums. Like, we get that. We got that years ago. We're past it, and we need some extra sauce, right? So whatever else can go in, let's figure out how to get it in there. And, you know, if it's a band and it still needs to sound like guitar, bass, and drums, cool. We will use some sort of foundation, and there will be a standard, and then there will be a place that we can deviate from. And I think sort of having like, I don't know how to describe this, but I guess it's like almost like a metaphysical thing or something, but it's like if you have sort of a star with like 5 points, and each point of the star can be like the furthest in that direction that your sound will deviate from your standard or something. That sort of gives you a cool way that you can bounce around within things and still sound like one group. And so like just being able to think about it conceptually like that, I think is fun, because you sort of have you know, square one, and then like we can go here and we'll come back, and we'll go here, we'll come back. It's sort of a different version of what we were talking about with the loud, quiet thing. You know, you need a place to return to.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's cool. I like that star analogy. It's a great visual.
Yeah, and maybe it's even a circle that is just something that you constantly are, you know, hitting the walls of. But I think, you know, when I think of a band, like let's just take a band I've already mentioned. Like we'll take Limp Bizkit, for example. Like I kind of know the concept of Limp Bizkit, right? And then there's directions that we can lean to. Like some of the stuff is a little harder. Some of the stuff is like kind of dark and sad or something, but it comes back to hard. Or there's hip hop elements, you know, and MPC chops and stuff like that. So I think kind of knowing your space that you can exist within is important.
For sure. And also like an example of like Limp Bizkit too. It's like when you are combining that rock sound with the hip hop sound, yes, the hip hop stuff traditionally has more low end in it. So it's like, how do you make it a little bit more cohesive? Well, maybe like those rock sections, you're adding a little bit of like drum sample underneath it to thicken it up and kind of find that middle ground or something like that. So you can make it sound cohesive. Like you find ways to connect it, but without it feeling like it's a big stretch or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And like from how like, I feel like rock has traditionally been mixed, comparing that to how we can mix things now with like extreme multi-band, even frequency-based like side chaining and stuff like that, you're able to like mix in a different way than you ever could as the music's turning into this new thing. So like maybe with a traditional kind of rock song, I wouldn't have a ton of like decay on the kick, and I wouldn't have too much sub in the bass maybe, but maybe nowadays I can like train those things on each other so that they interact smoother. And then maybe the bass guitar is in there with a bass synth, and maybe the bass synth takes care of a lot of the, you know, low stuff, and the bass guitar is like filtered up high enough that you're getting like a grindiness from it, but not a ton of like actual bass. And then if you can find the sweet spots with like your crossover points, that stuff can all blend together in a really unique way that's like, yo, this is some of the loudest stuff I've ever heard. Like, this is insane, man. Like, I feel like that some guys to watch who are really good at like tweaking the stuff is this electronic group called Noisia, Noisia. Maybe I'm butchering the name, but I'm pretty sure it's Noisia. I've listened to these guys for like probably 15 years at this point, and their stuff is just unbelievable. It's like, it makes you want to quit, you know? They're just so tweaked out at like, you know, I'm doing this to this one band, and then I have this one sound that plays on it's part of the kick, but it only plays on the first kick of every 4 bars, you know, like just to add that accent. And, you know, if you ever have a chance to like watch those guys do some kind of YouTube thing or anything, like they're unbelievably talented at making all kinds of different sounds work. It can sound very industrial, very like drum and bass sound all over the place, but everything sounds ridiculous. Knife Party was also like a big, what the hell is this moment for me? Like seeing like, or I guess hearing some of the songs that they're putting out and just how smooth and in your face the mixing is. Like, I get envious of it, man, because it's like, you know, Rob Swire is the guy for Knife Party who produces, I think, most of this stuff. And he was in Pendulum also, which is another amazing project. But like, you hear this stuff that's like not in your genre, and you're like, oh, I need to like get my shit together, you know? Because these other guys are killing it. Like, there's so much low end, they're so loud, the drums are so in your face. And while it is complicated sounding, once you start to get down into what it is, it's sort of like how I felt when I first went over to John's house, which is that you just have to know what to do, and at some point you've got to sort of invent your own way to get there. And so like watching how this stuff can fit together, and then you have like an aha moment, is really, really awesome and satisfying to come across, because you're like, oh, now I know exactly how to do this thing when I need to do this thing, you know? So yeah, so I know that's a long-winded rant.
No, it makes sense though. It makes sense for sure. So at the end of the day for you then, like, what ultimately makes a great sounding mix? Or how would you know when you're done a mix?
I think the mix is like a concept, and it's probably something that, you know, I feel like any mix engineer could wake up the day after they've turned something in and listen to something, and they'd be like, oh, I need to tweak that, you know? So I think some of it's knowing where to quit and not letting your maybe ego get in the way of it or something. But I think a good mix is just that it has to serve the song and not be destructive. So a good mix for, let's take 2 extreme examples, like a good mix for like a Lady Gaga, like in your face pop sound is going to be something that's like loud, ton of kick probably to drive the song, like good loud drums, like cool vocal delays and tails and stuff. A King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard mix, man, like Stu is unreal at just burying stuff in there so that you're like, I don't even know what the vocals say on half this stuff, but it's amazing. And his production is like, you know, sometimes there's no bass whatsoever in it. I'm talking like low end, like frequency wise, but you're just like, this is such a vibe, and the mix is great. I don't care what you say. Like, from a traditional sense, maybe, yeah, the mix sucks in that it's not loud kick and bass and everything in your face, right? But like, man, does it serve the purpose of the song? You know, there's all kinds of good mixes that you don't, it's like you don't really notice it. You're just like, this is a piece of art at this point. And I think mastering is kind of in a similar boat in that you can't ruin anything, right? Like being in the engineering side of things, I feel like do no harm is rule number 1. All you can really do is like try to make stuff feel better for people. And, you know, it's customer service at the end of the day. So it depends on who you're mixing for or what it is. Like if you have a little bit of like a creative liberty, the way that maybe King Giz has, like he can make stuff sound however he wants because it's his baby. But maybe somebody else would mix it a different way and he would be like, oh, that's cool. Or maybe it'd be like, you're not getting it at all, you know? On the other side of the coin, it's like maybe there's 10 mixers having a shootout against one, you know, to get one song on a record. And it's like, that's not really a boat I would love to be in, because I like to kind of just work with the artist on things to get it where we both feel like it's sick, and maybe we'll come up with some creative ideas along the way. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough to say what a good mix is. I think 10 people would give you 12 answers, you know.
For sure. But I think you gave some good examples of like how it works either way. You know, it isn't just a one size fits all approach to mixing. We don't all have the same frequency balance that we're looking for. You know, it's going to change depending on the genre and the musicians. And yeah, I mean, even for a specific genre, you're going to get artists that want their vocals lower or louder or more kick drum or whatever. It's going to vary just based on that. So yeah.
Yeah, like I've done some things with Zach Carper from Fiddler the last couple of years, and like something that he kind of turned me on to was like how loud the hi-hat is in certain genres, especially like he was basically just like, look, punk has like a hi-hat just loud as hell, right? And it's like I typically don't need or feel like I need to use a lot of hi-hat mic per se in mixing, because I feel like it gets on everything. It's all over the snare mic, it's all over the rooms, the overheads and stuff. But it's like, no, maybe you put the hi-hat mic dead center as a form of, you know, counting the groove or something. It's just like, we kind of need that thing to be in there. And maybe the balance of some of the punk stuff is different, but you know, yeah, other times I've muted the hi-hat mic and just hidden it in my session. So it could be whatever. I think a good mix serves the song and fits with what you're going for.
Right on, man. Dude, I love it. This has been awesome, like learning more about your process, your approach to this, and definitely like tons of great stuff here today. So thank you for taking the time to do this. If people want to learn more about you or maybe even work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can contact me probably through my Instagram is the best way to get a hold of me. I know it looks pretty bare, but I do check it. And you can find me there at Spencer Hoad, SpencerHoad. There's a site. You can drop me a link or something with music or say hi or whatever. I think that's how me and you got in touch. So that's probably the best way, or, you know, find me in the street.
Right on, dude. Well, again, thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. So that was my interview with Spencer Hoad, and I loved learning more about his time working with John Feldmann and learning John's approach to production. As I said at the beginning, I'm a big John Feldmann fan. You've probably even heard me talk about this in other episodes too. So I always appreciate getting any insight into what it's like to work behind the scenes with him and learn more about the projects that they worked on. But I thought it was really cool to hear him talk about the focus on arrangements and creating contrasting sections between verses and choruses, and how when you're thinking about dynamics and focusing on stripping things away in verses versus choruses, that kind of thing, it can really make things just feel a lot more cohesive, even though you're dealing with things that are maybe quieter versus loud or dense versus sparse, stuff like that. Like that contrast actually makes things feel cohesive, despite the fact that they sound like they're opposites, right? I just thought that was a really interesting thought, and it definitely makes sense. And it makes sense for why songs grow as you're listening to them and why things are exciting, right? Because if everything is loud all the time, nothing's loud. So yeah, definitely focusing on arrangement is a interesting thing. And I'm glad that he brought that up. I also thought it was really cool to dive deeper into that topic of saturation, especially during tracking. And I like how he put it that, you know, when you're driving signals, it's creating vibe. It's adding a little bit of compression. It's adding character to your tracks. And that can really go a long way as far as setting yourself up so that there's less to do in the mixing stage. You've got all of that glue all together. You've got that vibe. You've got that character. And so it doesn't mean that you're trying to fix something in post afterwards, right? It's committing to a sound on the way in. And that's something that I think a lot of people just really overlook. You know, you're often taught that you're not supposed to do certain things. And then because of that, people never try it and they never discover that something can sound really cool. I remember that being a really big lesson for me my first day working at a studio as well. Like I remember watching the head engineer, we were tracking guitar and he cranked the Neve like to the fullest and it just sounded like, I was like, whoa, like that's not what I thought you were supposed to do. Like I can hear the distortion. This is way too far. And he's like, yeah, but listen to it in the context of the mix. And you know what? It sounded amazing. So it's like you have to know the rules in order to be able to break the rules. And you have to be willing to experiment and then realize when experimentation fits the vibe of a song. So yeah, I thought it was really cool to hear Spencer talk about that too. And certainly something that if you've never tried it, try it. Try breaking your gear, like try breaking your gear in a controlled way that actually keeps it functional afterwards. But experiment and, have some fun with your gear and see how far the limits of it can go. Because you might end up realizing that you've now got this new tool that you can lean on when it comes to your productions to create something really unique and cool sounding. So yeah, I love digging into that stuff with Spencer and just thought he shared some really great analogies for this stuff too. So yeah, I really enjoyed that episode. I hope you did as well. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed to the podcast. We're releasing new episodes every Wednesday morning, so I don't want you to miss out. So definitely by subscribing, you won't miss any. And also, if you're working on music right now and you're not sure of what you need to do to get it to that pro sound, if you're not sure of how to get the vibe that you're looking for, or how to get the clarity and the polish, how to get the balance in your tracks, and you're struggling and you want someone that can help point you in the right direction and give you actionable feedback, that is exactly what I help my students with inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And inside of that program, I'm working one-on-one with my students. We're coming up with what your vision is for your songs, and we're coming up with a clear game plan from recording, editing, mixing your music, mastering your music. And I'm there throughout the entire process, walking you through that process, mixing with you on live calls, giving you feedback as you're working, really making sure that at the end of the day, you're getting the results that you want and that you now have a clear, repeatable plan so that you can repeat that for every other song that you're working on. You have a way of breaking down that thought process to know what settings are going to fit best for each song of yours. And that, yeah, you ultimately just can work faster, have more confidence, and get better results. So if you're looking for one-on-one help with your productions, I would love to help you. Make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can book a call with me where I'd love to learn more about the music you're working on, learn more about your processes, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and to see how I can ultimately help. And if it seems like I can help, then I'd love to talk to you about the program and what it would look like to work with each other. I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. So if you're interested in that, definitely, once again, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude, click the button to book a call, and let's go from there. But yeah, my goal with this podcast, with everything I do, is to help people put out more music and to help people feel proud of their music. So yeah, I would love to work with you. So if you are interested, definitely make sure to check out that website. And then with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. So thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.